Welcome back to Beyond the First Response. It's Christy Lister here, along with my co-host.
Ciara Madrid.
And we have one of our family members, our almost like a sister, after this past weekend, Leslie Maginn. Maginn again. I almost said it right. So, how are you today?
Doing very well.
Good. I'm excited because I met you. Gosh, that was a police week 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And why don't you go ahead and start with your story and how and why you ended up at police week?
Well, I actually ended up at police week because Mike, my partner, his father was a deputy sheriff in Grand Junction, Colorado, and he passed away December of 21. And so I got to go out to DC with his family and participate in all the ceremonies and the honor guard stuff, and it was pretty cool, like the escorts and all of that. And we got to hang out with the other families and the police that were there from Colorado, and which was really neat. It was a good experience, and especially for him because he hasn't like actively participated in a law enforcement ceremony, I guess. And he really said, he was like, it's just incredible, like the support they provided, and how proactive they were with his family and things like that. So that's how I ended up out there.
And that's because he died in the line of duty, right?
he was COVID. I mean, they classified it as such.
Yes. Okay.
So it was interesting being out there, and especially being from Denver, and the previous year there was a police officer that died in the line of duty, and so we were escorted by cops from Arvada, which is really close to the neighborhood I live in, and one of the departments that I take food to when they come to my happy hours and that kind of stuff. And it was a really incredible time for him and his family, and to honor Wayne. It was interesting for me. I appreciated all of that and want to honor those officers lost. And so that was an emotional experience to go through. However, it was really big because the previous year they didn't hold it. They had 2 years of officers they're honoring, and a lot of them were COVID related deaths. And not to diminish service or anything like that, but it was quite eye opening. And I knew already, like going into it, there wasn't going to be the suicides. They weren't going to be honored at the candlelight service or at the wreath ceremony, and that was difficult. And when we got all the mail about Mike's dad and what we were going to be doing, like he was just like, I can't believe they're doing all of this. This is incredible. And it was juxtaposition, if you will, being very happy that he felt supported and they were doing that for his dad, and also a little bitter that how many other families last year don't get to participate in this, who had officers in service that somebody like my dad, who was a fantastic cop and loved his job and his community, and they don't get to be honored because they don't agree with how they died. And even in talking to people out there, I'd bring up, like, we're here with Mike, and I support you guys too, and my dad was a cop, and there was always the question of how. And as soon as I said he committed suicide, it was 50-50 of, well, you're still part of the family, or, oh. So and I didn't realize at the time you guys were going to be out there, and we went to Tent City and started chatting, and because I think I had been following you guys and communicating for about 2 years at that point and had never put my dad into the database because I went in there a couple of times and there was a lot of questions that I couldn't answer. I don't even know his years of service. I was 10 when he died, almost 10. And there's nobody that can say, well, he was at Torrington this long and Englewood this long and Scottsbluff this long. And, so I know it was in the 10 to 13-year range, but unfortunately, that was 93 and records aren't kept. And at one point, it was probably 8-10 years ago, my sister was contacted by a daughter of one of my dad's old colleagues and said they were trying to find our family because they were like cleaning out his file. And so they sent like his headshot, which is what you guys have, and a few other minor items out of his file. And now he doesn't exist, can't go like search people on the internet and things like that. So yeah, when I walked up to the booth, I had no intention of doing that. And I'm glad that you asked me to. And Christy's just like, here's my laptop, like you're gonna do it. And it felt really good to be there and do that, because that was kind of like being there at police week that weekend, and maybe it just all came together that like he is going into your guys' database, he's going on the honor wall, and it felt really good to honor him as well, even if it was just amongst ourselves.
We
And
did have good conversations with other people too that I think we're in the same boat as you and don't know how, like us all, but especially for a child of an officer that's died by suicide, all the unknowns are never going to be answered. Not that they're going to be for anybody, but it's different because you're shut out. And that feeling has to be, not knowing has to be very uncomfortable. And hopefully some of that is beginning to heal a little bit, understanding that it had nothing to do with you. It had nothing to do with them not telling you. That's just the way it's always been in the first responder world.
And until I started, even last year, my first year at Family Week, I knew, but I didn't know the prevalence of these departments and the ostracization. It did happen to me, but almost 30 years ago, and it was a small town, and they still gave him a funeral with honors, which I've come to find out is very rare.
Yeah.
And so that's appreciated. And they weren't awful to us, but they just kind of disappeared, minus one or two. And there's always been a couple that have Facebook friends with them, and it's for years always been like, you can feel free to talk anytime. And I would reach out and be like, I would love to chat with you soon, but then I'd always chicken out. I don't know what to say. And, there's the potential of like, maybe I don't want to hear some of it, which I now don't think is the case, and wish that I had reached out sooner to get some other perspectives on who he was and, what went on versus my memory, and really lack of conversation and things within my family. But yeah, I just kind of lost my train of thought.
Oh, you're doing good.
It was, yeah, just really neat to sit with you and do that, and to be at the honor weekend. And it's just really opened my eyes, even more so. I knew that there were those things going on and within departments, but I didn't realize that it was still as bad as it is within departments and the mental health stigma, until I kind of, in 2019 really got into supporting our local departments and doing things in the community and doing some reach out, that there is still a lot of judgment and still a lot of, we don't talk about that. So
I think we're afraid to talk about that. It's not that we don't want to talk about it. We're afraid to talk about it because then it makes it real. So we just won't talk at all. We don't want to fail.
Yeah. And just like Leslie and I had a conversation just last night through text about a movie she was watching. And she said, it's crazy that, you know, we think we've come so far, but then we've only taken baby steps in 30 years. And that's part of the hardest, probably the hardest thing of fighting the fight against the stigma is, you know, you're moving forward and you can feel it, but then like in the grand scheme of things, like there hasn't been a big change. There hasn't been a big shift. And like, when is that going to happen? Like I mean, just as you guys both know, the last few days, like I want to scream from the mountaintops, like, you don't have to die. None of you, like, there's people here for you. But it's like, what really is going to make the change? And I mean, it's you, Leslie, and what you do. It's me, it's you, Christy, it's everybody. But like seeing how long like Leslie is out, you know, and she's fighting the fight along with us, and you know, with even little um recollection is not the word, is the word I'm trying to use, of, you know, her dad and her dad's service is still willing to go, hey, but it's not just about my dad. It's about his partner, his old partner, his, you know, the kid that sees a picture of him up on a wall or something like that. Like, because that's ultimately where we just have to go is forward. And it sucks. It totally sucks.
I
And
hear
I didn't
people
realize that
say,
you,
go ahead.
no, it's okay. You can
Okay.
go.
I hear people say, men say over and over, and it is typically the white middle-aged man that dies by suicide on average. But I hear them say, I couldn't talk to anybody because men don't do that. Uh, it'll make me look weak. You know, I won't be strong then. They won't believe I can do my job, or, you know, whatever that looks like in their minds. But that's certainly not the case. Vulnerability is a huge strength to have. And I think that's changing that word vulnerability to recognize it as a strength. That's the biggest thing to overcome it.
Yeah. And that it kind of was like a punch to the gut a little bit when Chief Neal started talking when they pulled the car up to our families. And no, I'm gonna start crying all the time. But it was, I don't know what words put to it, but his partner or colleague Archer that they're calling the car was the same year that my dad died. And for him to be standing up there as a chief of police and acknowledging that, having been in the field for the last 30 years and still feeling all the same things we do, was quite eye-opening. You know, and I know, and we can get into all this, but I got my dad's suicide note in 2021 that I didn't know existed, and there was a portion in there that said, brought up a colleague, and it was not blaming or anything like that. It was just, I wish he had pried a little bit and asked more questions. And he told me, like, people that talk about suicide don't do it. And I think that was a testament to all his whole department and everybody, not calling out this single person, but that was somebody that he felt he was closest to in the department. And it was just kind of eerie to read about some of the things going on in people in the department that knew. And he's, you know, he's like, well, maybe if I had listened to this person, things would have turned out differently. So there was positive and negative in it, but he he did try to get help. I know he did. I got, along with the letter, they sent a bunch of his day planners where he's very meticulous and wrote all of his days down, his calls down, his meetings. And like towards that last year, he also tracked the medication he was on and how it made him feel. And it was very interesting to see the progression, like the last couple of months there, where his thoughts were a little more chaotic and his handwriting not so good. And he at one point did tell his chief, and his chief told his entire department he'd walk in there and call him a pussy, and there was no support with the exception of a couple people. And how do you walk into work like that or think they're going to take his gun? To my knowledge, he was never put off of work, but he might have been towards the end there. It was just really heartbreaking.
Sounds like his chief was a bully, somebody who was probably suffering himself, and that's his way of deflecting what he's feeling inside.
Yep.
And for somebody to do that, that is what weak men and women are people that deflect it that way. It's the strength that your dad had to sit there and say, I'm struggling, working on getting help, and still showing up to work every day, knowing that a coward like that chief or anybody else in there that makes stupid ass comments like that, people like that, knowing that you still have to show up for work, you're going to do your job, knowing that you have nothing there to support you. So shame on that department, that chief, for being a coward.
Yeah.
And it's just a little devil's advocate. I mean, we're talking, right, almost 30 years ago, Leslie, right? So things have changed, but to that extent, and we talk a lot about the younger ones that come in and they have a healthier mindset, and they're the ones that are going to bring the change. But when you have those, and I call them the good old boys all the time, because when you have those good old boys still sitting in office, especially high up, they will change that younger mindset to fit their mindset. So as I was just talking today with the chaplain, change starts from the top. And that doesn't just happen in police departments, fire departments, and, EMTs. And, dispatch can fall under either EMT or fire or police, or it can be a whole separate center itself. But the change starts at the very top. Like we can't sit here and be naive and think that there's this one rookie kid that's going to go in and it's going to change the whole entire department's mind. But it's the mass majority of them going in that can change these old timers' minds. And I hate to say it, but push them out. Like if you don't want to grow and you don't want to help the department succeed, then it's time for you to retire. If there's people that told Matt he needed to retire because of his mental health, then it's time for you to retire because you're not addressing mental health. Or it was time for your dad's chief retire. Like if you can't accept change, especially in the world we live in, I strongly believe that there is no place for anybody like that on any kind of civil servant position in our country, period.
Or in leadership.
We already leadership period too, but that's a whole other like podcast and filters and stuff. But but to think of how strong your dad was. Like he probably woke up every day, and I'm trying not to make this emotional, but he probably woke up every day and said, all right, I'm going to show up. Are they going to take my badge? Are they going to take my gun? This is my life. This is my livelihood. This is what I love to do. This is what I wanted to be when I was a kid, whatever went through his head, or I'm doing all this for my girls, to protect my girls and my wife, like all of that. And to just be shit on, like that's the epitome of a police department that I'd love to like go and knock on a door and be like, hi, my name is Ciara Madrid, Dooley Madrid, whatever you want to call me. And, or you can call me bitch, whatever. And I'm going to tell you that everything you're doing is incorrect because you're going to keep losing officers. And it wouldn't shock me if you told me a number that was high of officers that have either died accidentally or more suicides out of that department, because it just is really anger. I'm angry. I have to keep my mouth shut now.
Yeah. The guy was a piece of shit.
Thank you.
And in one of my more angry times, probably about 8, 9, 10 years ago, I actually like went looking for his information because I was going to tell him what I thought of him, but he's no longer with us. So he was pretty old. So
was he old?
Yeah. Not positive. but what a great hero he was.
Right.
Oh, mhm. I know plenty like that.
I have seen them turn around though in their mindsets in some ways. So I know that that's possible. Um, I've seen them do that to my face where it was this, it was that. And I say, wait, hold on. Watch this. And then they're coming back and saying, you know what? We do have to do something different. And
Yep.
that does show change. So we at least have that going. But as a child, a young child losing your dad, sorry, something just flew in my face. It actually hit me in the face.
Okay. Stop it. Stop. Your ghost.
Honestly, it was like something poked me. That's why I thought it was a bug, but there's nothing flying around. Anyway.
She has ghosts.
Yes.
We've talked about this.
Yes. And my head is tingling too. So,
oh my gosh. Can you just talk and not talk about your ghosts? I have to sleep tonight. I didn't sleep last night.
I will edit that out. I was sick. What was I saying?
As a child.
Oh yeah, as a child, as a child, an adolescent losing their father is hard enough, and then losing their father to suicide and not knowing, you had to have some struggles that maybe you didn't understand at the time.
100%. I'll never forget the day it happened. I was in the basement playing. It was in July, so I keep saying almost 30 years, but it was this year. It just feels so surreal. It's been that long. And when I first, I was off a little bit. That's how weird my brain got. For a long time, I was like 2 years behind how long it had been. Anyways, but I heard him come home, and I was down in the basement, and he yelled something down the stairs, and I was like around, and we had like a storage room with some snacks and stuff in it, and I was in there, not like right at the bottom, and I wasn't paying attention. I don't know what he said, and I came out. I ran up the stairs because I wanted to see him, and made it up in time to see him get in his car and drive away, and drove out to a remote area and shot himself. And I went back downstairs and asked my friends. I was like, what did he say? And they kind of looked at me, and they're like, he said, tell those girls how much I love them. And we were all like, that was weird, and just kept like playing. And then one of the other cops, his wife came over, and she like wouldn't leave our house. And this whole time my mom was in their bedroom downstairs. And he had headbutted her with his gun that morning. Like, I didn't know. And I told her, I was like, Marie's here, and she won't leave. And then I was like, now she's washing our dishes. And looking back, my mom's like, she already knew, and then the chief came over, and my mom was upstairs, and I heard her start yelling, and this gal like tried to hold my arm, and I like smacked her. I'm like, what do you like? And went upstairs. My mom's best friend was standing there, and she's put her arm around me and was like, your dad shot himself. He died. And I was in shock. And the following day, it was either the following day or the day after, because it was just in the newspaper. So it was maybe 2 days later. But in my mind, it was the next day. I made my mom take me to my baseball game. And because I was just like, fuck this, I'm still gonna go play baseball. Who cares? I was already feeling like that shame and kind of like fuck the world. And the kids, like one in particular, was going around like, did you see the paper this morning? And pointing in whispers, and I was just getting pissed, and I ended up like having to get kicked out of the game because I threw my bat at the dugout when I struck out, and like was telling the guy feeding the pitcher machine to fuck off. And, like,
all valid, all completely valid emotional responses.
100%. And one of my coaches, he's the uncle of like kid I still am acquaintances with, took me around the dugout, and he's like, this just happened and it's okay. And I was like, no, I just struck out. Like, no, that doesn't even matter. Like, I just struck out. And my mom tried to make me go to counseling, and Dr. Roper, just this nice old man, his old cowboy. Uh, and I wouldn't really talk. And he asked me a question. He was like, what is the worst day of your life? And I was like, the day that my dog Bozo died. And just looked at him, and I couldn't even like get the words out of my mouth that like my dad was dead or that it bothered me. And I mean, kids are just assholes. There was some teasing and stuff a little bit. I was actually like, it wasn't as bad as I think it could have been in a lot of areas. There was a group of girls a grade above me, and they would say shit to me, but they eventually stopped because like my
You kicked
principal
their
and the
ass.
teachers and the people in that community were very supportive, and they're like, you guys will not be here if you continue this. And thank God, like the administrative staff was supportive of that. But it's, well, your dad killed yourself because you're so ugly, and just like shit like that. And
Kids are awful.
yeah,
That is one thing that has never changed is kids are awful. They're just, that's so mean.
and it didn't
And
really happen again until seventh grade. And sixth or seventh grade, this kid Juan was kind of saying similar things. And his family, like his father was a known like alcoholic, like always like getting in trouble in the community. And I'm sure my dad's been over to his house a lot. He's like, I know who your dad is. And so him and I got in a fight in the stairwell in between classes. And again, just ended up, I had a really great principal, and they thankfully, like, they did put a stop to a lot of that. There was obviously, there's always like some bullying going on, but like it never got terrible. And realistically, like I was a popular kid. You know I just dove into sports. I got good grades, and generally, I mean, I was dysfunctional. I can see that now, but on a level of interacting and being social, I was okay with that because I was just completely distracting from what happened and moving on from it. Never talked about my dad, never um, acknowledged it, I guess. And it's really once I kind of moved schools between ninth and 10th grade. And when I was a freshman, I was getting D1 college letters to play basketball, and it was my life. And my mom, I was at a summer camp, and she was like, how would you feel if we moved to Lincoln? And I was at this camp where a bunch of the counselors were from Lincoln. It was in Nebraska. And it's like, well, cool. Then I get to hang out with all these like older, college age kids who I have kind of become attached to and felt like they cared about me. And that's all I was basing anything off of at the time. So lonely. And so we did move. And the high school I went to was, it's just one of these bigger high schools. If you didn't play on their summer club teams, you didn't exist. And I got super depressed. And it was so strange because like I love my basketball coach, all of them in Scottsbluff, and I love playing and I love my teammates. And as soon as like they became critical of me a little bit, it was like I didn't know how to play basketball anymore. And then I tore my ACL twice. And my physical therapist was like, well, call Coach Larson. And I was just like, I don't even want to play anymore. And I didn't even play the last year. And it was like I just completely lost my identity. I mean, it's not like I was like a college or pro athlete, but it was very much enough a part of my life at that point that it was like all I had. And when we left Scottsbluff, I didn't even tell any of my friends we were moving. I didn't say goodbye to anybody. And I went on to do that 2 more times in my life, making big moves and just going from Lincoln to Denver, and then more of hopping friend groups rather than like moving geographically. But yeah, I wish I'd gotten help sooner. I didn't know the gravity of it, and I didn't want to listen to people, and I would I distracted myself with anything I could join, and have a pattern of like being very interested in something in this and that group and jumping around because there's some safety and inconsistency, but having something new all the time.
I was going to
And
ask if I can ask,
once
is the jumping around, was it easier because and I don't know if you'll actually know the answer, looking back on you then, was it easier for you to just get up and leave than to hear somebody say goodbye because that was the last thing your dad said to you and you misheard it or didn't really hear it, but that that's what he said?
probably.
And has counseling
Yeah, because one of
through
the
that?
people that I left was, what's that?
There's a delay, Christy.
I know, I see that now. Am I delayed talking?
You're not anymore, but you were for that few minutes. Like your mouth was moving, but there was no sound. You were off.
And what's new?
And here we go.
And welcome. Do you think that
Yes, I do. Because actually one of the kids that I played baseball with, he was my age. His dad just kind of took me under his wing and he became my dad. And I attribute me living a somewhat normal lifestyle with the experience I had is because I had him in my life and some normalcy and a male role model. And I considered him my dad as much as possible, like, and was very close with their family. And my mom, she was always kind of, I think she appreciated it, but felt pushed out. Like they were pretty well off. And yeah, I would rather spend time with Dave often than her and my sister. And that wasn't because I disliked them or blamed them or anything. It was just very much a replacement. I was very close to my dad and I needed that. And we drove out of town and I didn't even tell Dave I was leaving. And I actually only, and it like has broken and bothered me for, what was it, 17 years, 18 years? Because then finally in 2018, I contacted him. And I did it for so long because I knew he wasn't like gonna not want to see me. But I imagined like, has he like kind of just forgotten about it? Is it as important to him? And like I imagine for years what it would be like to see him again. And we just sat out on his four-wheeler one night. Like he was like, yes, like come to town. And he just started crying. It was like, I just never understood and always thought about you. And like, you were my daughter. And he's like, I can get it. But yeah, like that really, really sucked. And I'm glad you're here now. And like, I got home, I drove because it's only about 3 hours from Denver. And I got home and he like sent me this really nice text. I'm like, all right. I was emotional, but I got home and sat on my porch and I mean, my eyes just flooded. It wasn't, I couldn't control it. I wasn't even thinking, like, I just sat there and like, it just poured out of me. It was a very visceral response to like, to seeing him again and knowing like that he is still in my life and loves me, and letting go of that guilt and everything that I had felt for so long, and wondering if he would be in my life again and things like that. So so we've remained in touch, and that's been great. And I'm very, very glad for that. But yeah, I through college and all my jobs and everything, like I was so unhealthy and drank a lot. And, some of back to the point of the jumping around, I just, I would get bored or something. And
So
any type of like routine or like a longevity, like was um hard to handle or imagine.
you were always, it's like you were always afraid something was going to end before you could end it, because that is, and we all have it because of trauma. It's a form of control. Like you can control when you leave that situation, right? So
Yeah.
that's, and we can't help it. I mean, we all have our forms of control after our trauma. Like, so that's what you did. And because you didn't get the help that you needed when your dad died, it trickled into your adult life, and it hurt you, but you can recognize that now and you see that now. um and like Christy and I've talked a lot about how important it is for the kids, um even if their fathers or mothers who are on the job are still alive, is the trauma comes home to the family too, right? Like even before your dad died, you guys had probably some form of trauma, and not saying that in a bad way, because I think every child has some form of trauma in their family. Like if you don't, like I don't even know how to put you, like
I
a
know.
god,
Where
right? Who what kid does not have some form of trauma? But then you had a trauma on top of trauma, and it was just never addressed. So your form coping was, and your form of control was leaving the situation, and you not getting hurt, you hurting somebody else, like almost like I've hurt enough, so I'll hurt you, and then I'll hurt you, and then I'll hurt you, because that is our trauma response. Like, I mean, I even can still do it sometimes, where you're not going to leave me. You want to go? Okay, fine. I'm out. Bye. Your 2 weeks is up. Bye. And I jokingly say that, but it is the form of our trauma responses of how we can control that situation, because we don't want to get hurt again.
Yeah.
We don't want to feel that pain again. And I'm glad that you found it, but it sucks that you had to go through it. But I'm also like, I feel like when you do even extra work, quote unquote, because you had to do extra work because you didn't do the work for a long time, it changes who you are today, and how much better of a person you are, and how you see the world in such a different view. And then you have a different drive in life.
I think for me that did happen. A lot of it was more of a shame response, and of their not a like fuck you, like I'm gonna hurt you first, but more of like they're eventually gonna like see who I am, or see through whatever facade I thought I had. um and that took me so long to figure out, because I didn't have any guilt. I didn't feel bad. I didn't think like, oh, if I had made it up the top of the stairs, he wouldn't have done it, like carried anything like that. But he was I, my best friend, and I loved him more than anything in the world. And I just couldn't understand how anybody would like be able to see me as good and want to be around me. And part of the like leaving and jumping around, and I can even attribute it to academics and now jobs, where I I went through so many years of, it's kind of like, oh, my tire is flat, am I going to change it, call AAA, or shoot myself? Like it was just always on the table and always an option. And so I knew like, well, if something got bad enough, there was always this. And I was never like super suicidal like for that whole time period. There was a small half a year there. But people are like, why don't you make goals and write them down in your 6 month or 5 years? Because I can imagine that what 5 fucking years would even be like. I had no concept of time. Um, and quite frankly, for a lot of my 20s, I wasn't sure I was going to be there in 5 years. Like, why am I going to make a 10-year plan? And, I felt it a lot this year and last year because when I turned 40 in November, I'll have outlived my dad. And it's just absolutely insane to me. Um, and had I not been so opposed to admitting that it affected me, or that, like, oh yeah, I was 10, I dealt with that just fine and it doesn't bother me at all, things wouldn't have come to the head that they did. But I do believe there's it for me in my life personally, that the timing was kind of the universe of, you know, I did get to that point at the end of 2009. I had a therapist that had me go do ketamine. I had purchased a gun. I have a plan. I think it was cathartic, as sick as that sounds, that I had it, because I would never do it. But I was just so broken and in a place that I had never gotten to before, and worked out of that. And I ended up having, 2020 ended up being one of the biggest years of growth of my life and being the happiest I've been in 21. And then when I got that letter, it was April of 21. And had I gotten that year, like 5 years ago, I would have found every reason in there to, let it be a catalyst for me to be angry and depressed, or like find something that was wrong with me in it, even though was there's comfort and closure in it that I wouldn't have been able to accept prior.
As I say, there's everybody that I've ever known that has gotten a letter. There is, after you do the work and you heal, and you can't just read the letter like right after they pass and go, oh, okay, I'm okay now. Like, oh, closure. It's when you do the work and heal after they're passing that you can go back with a more open mind and go, okay, this is closure for me. This is, this is what I needed to know, so to speak, because we never really know, right? We won't ever know. But you get some of those answers answered, and it's a form of closure that you needed. Just the same as opposite as like if you don't have a letter, I mean, and you had that, I don't have a letter, and then 38 years go by and all of a sudden you get a letter. But then you, like you said, you would have never ever been able to understand that letter prior. And that takes a lot of balls to say that, because you suffered, and you suffered as a child, which I'm not knocking your mom, but because we all make mistakes, especially being a parent through suicide, to just not recognize that you were struggling so much or be so broken yourself. I mean, I know I have been so broken before where I would have never recognized anything in my children. But to just, I don't know, like I've known you and I've loved you for, 2 years now, but to know your story even more in depth, I mean, and you've shared a lot with me prior to, but to know your story more in depth, like it takes a lot of balls, Leslie, to heal 37 years later and do the hard work, or 27 years later, because it's not easy. And then you add in the trauma of the years that ultimately you did to do to yourself, and you have to heal from those too. And to then now be where you are and do what you do, that's a lot. And that's pretty badass. So I'll say that,
Well,
because
and
trauma is not easy.
taking that and creating a foundation, you've created a foundation, correct?
Yeah.
Tell us about that, because this is huge from going from that to this.
Yeah. So, the funny thing was, the progression of 2019 was, it was actually Christmas of 2018, and I wasn't feeling great. for some other circumstances. I was like, go take some like breakfast burritos out to like the local police station and just like do something good and say thanks. And that turned into me and one of my colleagues going out a couple Fridays a month and taking food out and thank you notes to our local fire and police stations, which then turned into a monthly happy hour where we would raise money for local nonprofit foundations and just a place to hang out, meet people, and have the community and friends come and show them some support. And so I did, yeah, that was all of 2019. And then we had one planned in January 20 or February 2020, which got canceled. And so I still spent a few months there with a different colleague, taking food to stations and hospitals and things in those first responder frontline worker areas. And I knew that I wanted to do something that was, we'll continue like doing a couple of our events because they're great. They're fun. They raise money for great foundations. But I've spoken a lot with friends and people in the responder community of like, where's really like a need or an avenue, because I've had enough response of like just in private talks or social media, and things that I've shared with people saying like, this really affected me and really affected things that I have thought of in the place I was in and what it would do to my family. And I've even had other people who, I think one of my firefighter friends who is just wonderful, and you know, his kids and wife are great, and he, after I posted the article last year, was like, this really reminds me that I need to focus on like the time I'm spending and how I'm treating my family, making sure that they know how much I love them. So I think it's both sides of the coin, people hurting, and you know, it can be a reminder that, you know, I mean, life is fleeting, we know that we're all going to die, but I think we just get caught up in so much shit sometimes. And so last year, last summer, I was at a networking event within the real estate industry and ended up meeting my friend Brooke, who her boyfriend's a firefighter, and started talking about the happy hours. And she contacted me a couple of weeks later. We hit it off that night, and she's like, I'd love to go grab coffee or drink and like learn more about this and see how I can help. And she ended up doing like a southern chapter of Denver of the first responder happy hours that last year in the summer and fall. And then her boyfriend was, one of his best friends was Dylan Vakoff, who was a Arvada officer. He's 26, I think. I mean, he was killed last year in the line of duty. He was shot. So we, last September, in 10 days, threw together this fundraiser at a place called the Grizzly Arrows. They ran its country dancing bar venue, and raised $15,000 for his family. And we were both just kind of like, this is awesome, and we need to think about, you know, future endeavors together. And finally, at the end of last year, we were like, let's make it official and co-found Foundation 1010. And I don't know that I would have, like, it's been in my mind to do that for a long time. And she's the perfect person to found it with. And, you know, the more perspectives, the better sometimes, I think. But we did an event in June, where we had first responders come beer tend at a local brewery, and that was the third time that they've hosted that for us. And then in September, we're going to do the event for Dylan again. And, you know, we just want to get things together, make sure we pick a good board, have the organizational things really down pat. And next year, I started applying for a couple different grants. We're going to do a kids camp, a backpacking trip rather, with kids of first responders. And somebody who randomly showed up at the happy hour in June, he's a insurance agent. He's like, "Oh, I just saw this ad on Facebook." He's like, "But I was just retired." He was just retired within the last couple of years from the fire service in Idaho. And so we went out to lunch one day and just got to talking, and he's talking about how a couple of his best friends died on the job and he never saw their kids again, and just how that kind of works within that community sometimes. And growing up, he had the same experience of his father was in the service also and lost friends. They moved away when the father passed away. But we want to take these kids out from, I mean, Denver Metro is huge, and get them together where they might not have met each other, out of the different departments that their parents work in, and help them to forge friendships and go out and do some team building stuff, and have a counselor out and do a session on, facing adversity and challenges, and talking about like the risks of the job that their parents are in, and that, how to talk about that and remain open with people, and be able to have those friendships where you can call and somebody understands that, I was scared today, or like my dad went on a call and, we didn't hear from him for 8 hours. And, and God forbid something did happen, that those friendships would be deep enough that they would remain friends, so that that didn't happen to them and they wouldn't be on an island, or if, the other parent decided to move, that it would be enough that they would stay in touch somehow. And especially like with technology and everything today, that's hopefully going to help, that if something like that happened, that they could stay connected. And then, we do want to do a wellness conference here. And I have started talking with people that I want to come help with that, just a day conference, and just really support them and their families. And I think that we'll eventually figure out how to support both sides of it. But for now, like that conference, I think will just really be geared towards them, and being able to talk with one another, and therapists or chaplains and the people that can come facilitate, so that we can prevent it. That's got to be the first line of defense to some degree, is getting together and opening up about it, and making connections with people in your field that understand and will support you and won't judge you for getting help or feeling poorly, because it's just, you have to have that, or what are you going to do? You can read all the books you want, which is what I did, or all the research papers you want, and intellectualize it, and do anything. But when you're lacking that connection and love in your life, it doesn't matter if you know why you're doing something.
So true. I think you have to accept and be accountable for what your struggles are, to, throughout the process. It didn't start with you, but we all bring on our own struggles as we have unhealthy coping mechanisms. We work past it, but if you can't accept and acknowledge that you have not fully worked past something, but you are, or you have fully worked past something and you're accountable for the past, that's when you can make a difference. Not the do as I say, not as I do mentality that I think often happens.
And I love that you're incorporating the kids and doing something.
Yes.
Because like Christy and I have talked is, like new guys on the job, new guys, gals, whatever on the job, like they become friends, wives become friends, kids becomes friends, but then the stressors of the job separate them. And then they don't want to be friends with a cop and a cop's wife and their kids, because we've got our own shit here. So it just completely gets separated. So the kids don't have somebody they understand. And And we know that from a different perspective. We know that our girls talk every single day since they've gotten home from Texas, along with Annie's daughter, Brielle.
I love that.
And me too, because that's, side note, that's who Danica went to first yesterday. She went to Brielle and she just was crying. And the bonds that come from some forms of brokenness, right? Because if you're bringing these kids out, you're already recognizing that they're different than another kid because their dad is a first responder. You know, maybe he's a special victims detective or, you know, sergeant, and he's not home all the time. So you're already bringing these kids together in a form that gives them a bond that you can't break. I mean, they're kids. Yes, bonds could break, but you know, in 2 or 3 years, they grow up some more, and then they realize how important those people truly are to them. And like that's my goal. I mean, my goal is obviously to end suicide all over, like especially after this week and how our family has gone through stuff. But supporting the families need so much support from first responders. The families need so much support for being a first responder family. Like it is lacking so much in every community I know. There is no groups, there is no help, there is no nothing. They're wearing the badges and they're putting on the fire suit right next to their fireman, their their police officer, their dispatcher, and there's nothing for them too. And they go through the trauma too. They don't always necessarily see it, but they may get their police officer that comes home and just randomly throws their shit down and go, I cleaned brains off the ground today. Like that's that to us, that world is normal, right? They come home, they talk about the nasty things, but we don't know how to process it either. Like it's not healthy for us to process it. And then when you're secluded and you're separated from everybody and everything that might know what you're going through, then you have nowhere to go and release it either. So, I mean, don't tell Ryan, I'm in to help you find a family one too. I mean, I know I'm in Nevada, but I can always go to Colorado, whatever. But no, but it just is. No.
At the end of the day, for the kids, especially, what you're doing is huge because what I've noticed, especially after this past, after all the kids were together in Texas, they are emotionally stunted in growth around the time that their parent passed away. They were already emotionally stunted in growth because the proper, healthy processing tools were never given to them because they weren't provided in the household. And unfortunately, then they feel left out, different, on top of not having a parent. That just adds to that. And something has to change for them so that they can be healthy and not recognize that 27 years later, right? They need to know that they're normal and it's okay to not be, you're judging yourself the most. It's okay.
Right.
Yeah, and that's like our mission. I'll just read it, I guess, like, is to enhance the well-being of first responders and their loved ones through advocacy, support, and resource provision by raising awareness and providing access to tools and services that promote their physical, emotional, and mental health. We strive to improve their quality of life and show gratitude for their selfless service to our communities. Our goals include mobilizing and engaging the community and supporting first responders by raising awareness of the challenges they face and facilitating opportunities for first responders to interact with community members. We also aim to honor those we've lost, raise funds for first responders and their families, and provide value and education. And it's evolving, but our hope is that we do provide family support along with bonder support because of everything that you guys just said. Like it is imperative to have that and to know that it's there and see that. And and especially I can relate to that because of working in the ICU. Like I'd come home and talk about things that I saw, and it wasn't even in the field. It's once they get to the ICU, and Mike is always kind of like, all right, well, do you want to go to breakfast now? Or and so it's a special sector, if you will, of some of the things that we see and how we react to it. And you gotta have the skill set to listen to it sometimes.
And given the right tools to processing it will make a incredible difference for all of our families and first responders in general. Your Foundation 1010, you have a Facebook page?
We do.
Okay.
It is Foundation 1010.
Did I say it backwards?
1010.
Did I say it backwards?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think she was just repeating you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I say things backwards sometimes. So.
Wow.
And then our website is foundation1010.org. And then our Instagram, somehow that was taken. So it's foundation10_10.
So multiple ways.
That's the most interactive. Facebook somehow is just, I don't know what's going on there, but so we're mostly active on Instagram.
So check them out on Instagram and get involved. Even if you're not living in Colorado, you can still get involved. That's the cool thing about first responder families that have gone through crisis, which we're gathering how to process by us being able to do this across the country, helping each other across the country.
Putting together a list of resources, and that's something we're also working on. Is we are in Colorado, but we're making an effort to make connections with other first responder nonprofits in different states and things, so that we will eventually have that on our board of local resources, or we can help find them. So any exposure and any help is greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. Thank you for everything that you're doing and the strength that it's taken to overcome and learn about yourself along the way. And we were both been incredibly lucky to have been introduced to you a couple of years ago and watch you grow in that, even in just that. We are excited to be able to start our day with Badge Brew Coffee. Hey, Robin, did you know that Badge Brew has a new charitable badge collab roast?
Hey, Christy, I thought I heard that was going to happen.
Yeah, it's called First Response Roast with a spicy, smooth, medium roast with flavor notes of spice cake and citrus undertone.
Oh, that sounds amazing. And if that doesn't tempt our audience, a portion of the proceeds go to First Help. Oh, and don't forget, they're first responder family owned. Whether you're on day shift, night shift, or the shift of raising your family, Badge Brew has your coffee ready and waiting.
So let me ask you, what's your badge of honor? Find out by going to badgebrewcoffee.com and order yours. If you want the first response roast, click on Charitable Badge Collab. I know I am.